The aroma of baked ham and warm yeast rolls hung heavy in my mother's house, a familiar scent that usually brought a sense of comfort. But this year, it was a prelude to war. The air was thick with the manufactured pleasantries of family gatherings, a fragile truce that could shatter at the slightest provocation. I stood in the living room, a glass of iced tea in my hand, observing the scene like an anthropologist studying a volatile tribe. My name is David, and I'm 47. By most metrics, I've had a successful life. A beautiful wife, a solid career, a house with a yard big enough for my daughter to play in. But in this house, surrounded by my family, none of that seemed to matter. My mother, Martha, a woman in her late 70s who still insisted on cooking an Easter feast for a dozen people, bustled around the dining room, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. She was the matriarch, the glue, and the one person I would never want to disappoint. She looked tired, a network of fine lines around her eyes deepening with every small frantic movement. She caught my eye and offered a tired, loving smile, a silent plea for peace that I understood instantly. My wife, Sarah, was a calming presence beside me. She knew the drill. For the past 20 years, she had navigated my family's turbulent waters with a grace I could only admire. She squeezed my hand and whispered, "Just breathe. We'll get through it." She knew I wasn't just here for ham and deviled eggs. I was here to endure. And then there was him, Michael. My younger brother by 3 years. My perpetual antagonist since we were kids, fighting over a single Lego brick. He stood by the bay window, a can of domestic beer in his hand, a scowl etched permanently on his face. He was a mirror reflecting every insecurity I'd ever had, every fight we'd ever had. We looked alike, a cruel twist of genetic fate, the same brown hair, the same strong jaw, the same height. But the years had not been kind to him. He carried the weight of a lifetime of disappointments, and I was, in his mind, the sole reason for all of them. Dinner was announced, a merciful end to the living room charade. We all shuffled into the dining room, a meticulously set table groaning under the weight of my mother's efforts. Ham, scalloped potatoes, green bean casserole, and an array of salads. Michael sat directly across from me, his wife Lisa, a quiet woman who always seemed to be apologizing with her eyes, at his side. My mother sat at the head of the table. My father, who had been reduced to a silent, gentle presence by a series of small strokes, at the other. The initial conversation was a study in forced normalcy. My cousin Mark, a jovial man who ran a successful HVAC business, asked me about my work. "So, David, I hear business is booming for you guys. That last acquisition, that was a smart play. You've really cornered the market in the Northeast." I gave him a brief, humble answer, downplaying the effort. We had a good year, a lot of hard work from a lot of people. The moment the words left my mouth, I felt Michael's gaze like a physical blow. He scoffed, a short, sharp sound that everyone at the table pretended not to hear. Everyone but me. "It's easy to have a good year when you were handed everything on a silver platter," he said, his voice low and laced with a familiar venom. My father stirred, his eyes darting between us. My mother placed her hand on Michael's arm, a silent command to stop. But Michael was fueled by years of stored-up grievance. He wasn't going to stop, not now. "Michael," Lisa said, her voice barely a whisper, "it's Easter. Please." He ignored her. He looked at me, a cold fire in his eyes. "You know, I remember when you were just a college kid, talking about being a big-shot CEO. I never thought you'd actually do it. Thought you'd crash and burn like you always did." My mother sighed, her shoulders slumping. My sister, Karen, across the table shook her head. My other cousins and their families suddenly became fascinated with their plates. I took a sip of water, my hand steady despite the roiling anger in my gut. This was his show, and I had been cast in the role of the smug older brother. "Michael, we can talk about this later. It's not the time." "Why not? It's the perfect time," he retorted, his voice rising a notch. "Everyone's here. Everyone knows what you are. The prodigal son who left us all behind. You think you're so much better than the rest of us just because you climbed the corporate ladder. I saw the headline about you last month, you know. Local boy makes good. What a joke. The article talked about your vision and your unwavering determination. It didn't mention your lack of integrity or the people you stepped on to get there. I felt the silence of the room press in on me, heavy and suffocating. My mother looked at me, her eyes begging me to take the high road, to not let this escalate, but the old wounds were bleeding. "Michael, what is this really about?" I asked, my voice as calm as I could make it. "Is it about that company I bought 3 years ago? Or is it about something else entirely?" He slammed his beer can down on the table, the sharp thwack echoing through the room. "It's about everything, David. It's about the fact that you've always been a failure, a liar, a fake. You've just gotten good at hiding it. You sold your soul for a title, a fancy car, and a big house, and for what? To be miserable? Look at you. You're empty. You think all this success makes you a better person, but it just makes you a bigger failure in the grand scheme of things." His words hung in the air, a cruel, damning verdict. My wife, Sarah, placed a comforting hand on my knee. My father just stared at the table, a single tear tracing a path down his cheek. My mother had her head in her hands. The other family members were frozen, horrified witnesses to a feud that had defined our lives for decades. But a strange thing happened. As the word failure left his lips, something inside me shifted. A profound, almost surreal calm washed over me. I wasn't angry anymore. I was simply aware. Aware of the irony, the sheer, staggering, gut-wrenching irony of his declaration. He was so consumed by his anger and his narrative that he couldn't see the truth. I looked at him, at his flushed face and his trembling hands, and a small, bitter smile touched the corner of my lips. It wasn't a smile of arrogance, not really. It was a private, sad smile, a smirk born of a secret, the secret that gave his words a meaning he would never comprehend. I held his gaze, the smirk widening just a fraction. He saw it and mistook it for arrogance, which only fueled his rage further. But he didn't know the truth. He called me a failure. I knew better. I knew the man who called me a failure, reported to me every Monday morning. The smirk stayed, a silent retort to a lifetime of accusations. And in that moment, in the quiet, tense aftermath of his outburst, I realized something else. My brother's narrative of my life was so wrong, so tragically off base, that it was almost comedic. He had no idea what kind of failure he was speaking of. Because if he knew the truth, if he knew that for the past 3 years he had been working for me, and that his livelihood was dependent on the very failure he just condemned, the look on his face would have been far more devastating than any word he could have uttered. The silence stretched, broken only by the soft tick of my mother's grandfather clock in the hall. The ham, now cold and unappetizing, lay on the platter. The air, once filled with the promise of a peaceful holiday, was now charged with an unspoken and undeniable reality. Michael had laid his cards on the table, and now it was my turn to play mine. The silence in the car was heavier than any conversation could have been. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was a quiet born of shared exhaustion and a lingering sting. The engine hummed, a low, steady sound as we pulled away from my mother's house, leaving the false comfort of her carefully manicured lawn and the turmoil of her dining room behind. Sarah sat beside me, her hands clasped in her lap. She didn't speak, not yet. She was letting me have a moment, letting the adrenaline that had been coursing through my veins settle down. The afternoon sun, bright and golden, was a cruel contrast to the storm that still raged inside me. The windows were down, a light breeze ruffling my hair, but it did nothing to clear the oppressive feeling. I drove on the back roads, the familiar suburban landscape of manicured lawns and identical 2-story houses blurring past. "David," Sarah finally said, her voice soft but firm. It was a question, an invitation. She knew there was something more. She knew that my little smirk wasn't just a moment of smug defiance. I took a deep breath, the air filling my lungs with the scent of freshly cut grass and spring blossoms. He never stops, does he?" I said, the words coming out as a tired sigh. "It's been 45 years of the same conversation." "It wasn't a conversation, David," Sarah corrected gently. "It was a public execution. He was trying to tear you down in front of everyone." "And he almost succeeded, didn't he?" I said, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. Except I'm not who he thinks I am, and neither is he, really. The road turned into a long, quiet stretch, bordered by tall oaks and maples. I glanced at her, her expression one of deep concern. She had known my family's dynamic for 2 decades, but she had never seen me react the way I did today. My smirk had been a new element in the old drama, and she was a keen observer. "That look on your face," she began. "That wasn't the usual, I'm going to stay calm for Mom look. What was that? It wasn't just about the words, was it?" I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white. The truth felt like a heavy stone in my stomach, a secret I had carried for too long. "No," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "It wasn't just about the words." I pulled the car over to the side of the road, killing the engine. The sudden silence was deafening, save for the chirping of a few birds high in the trees. I turned to face her, the confession forming on my lips. "Sarah, Michael works for me." I saw the confusion flicker across her face, followed by disbelief, then a slow dawning comprehension. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She just stared at me, searching my eyes for any sign of a lie. "What? What are you talking about?" she finally managed to say. "Exactly what I said. He's been working at my company for 3 years now. He's in the sales department. He works on the East Coast team. His manager, Ken, reports to me. Ken doesn't know the connection. Nobody at the company does. I've kept it completely under wraps." The disbelief on her face morphed into a mix of shock and, I realized with a pang, hurt. She was hurt that I had kept this from her. She had been my confidant, my partner in crime for years, and this was a secret I had guarded from her, too. "But why?" she asked, her voice quiet. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" I ran a hand through my hair, the weight of the years of silence feeling crushing. "It's complicated. He was having a hard time. His last job, he got laid off. He was struggling to find something new. It was a bad time for him, and a worse time for him and Lisa. I heard about it from Karen. They were on the brink of losing their house." "So you gave him a job?" she asked, her voice incredulous. "No, not directly. I told Ken I had a referral, a candidate he should look at. I vouched for him, got his resume to the top of the pile. I made sure he got the interview, and I made sure Ken was impressed with him. I stayed completely out of the process after that. Michael thinks he got the job on his own merit, through the normal channels. He has no idea I had anything to do with it." "And you've been letting him think that for 3 years? And today he called you a failure, not knowing that he's working for you. His paycheck comes from your company, and you just let him say that?" I nodded slowly, the bitterness of the truth a tangible taste in my mouth. "Yeah, that was the smirk you saw. It wasn't about being smug. It was a quiet moment of profound sadness. He thinks he's so much better than me, so much more authentic, and he has no idea that if it weren't for me, he'd probably be living on the street." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, processing the information. She was putting the pieces together, the bits of our family's history that had always seemed so random suddenly falling into place. "So you're his boss," she said, almost to herself. "The man who just called you a failure, the man who has spent his entire adult life resenting you, he reports to you indirectly, and he doesn't know it. That's right. Why? Why didn't you just tell him? Or tell me, at least?" The answer was complex, rooted in decades of pain and miscommunication. Because if I told him, he would have quit on the spot. He would have seen it as charity, as a handout, and he would have hated me even more for it. He'd rather lose everything than owe me anything. And I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to see what I was doing as some sort of magnanimous gesture. It wasn't. It was complicated. It was a way for me to feel like I was a good brother, even when he wouldn't let me be. It was a way to help him, without giving him another reason to resent me. It was a secret I had to keep to protect us both, I guess. But you're not a good brother, David. You're not a good son. He said you were a failure. He said you sold your soul. He tore you down in front of your family, your wife, your child. And you just let him do it. You just let him say those things. Sarah, he's never going to see the full picture. He's so wrapped up in his own version of our life, of our childhood, that he can't see the truth. He thinks I got a handout. He thinks everything was just handed to me. He doesn't see the nights I stayed up until 3 a.m. writing business plans, the years I ate ramen noodles, the risks I took that could have bankrupted me. He doesn't see any of that. He just sees the nice house and the company car and thinks I'm a sellout. "So what are you going to do?" she asked, the question hanging in the air between us. "You've let him work for you for 3 years. You've let him get away with a lifetime of resentment. What now?" I looked at the road stretching out before us, a long winding path through the trees. My life had been a series of choices, each one leading to the present. I had chosen to help my brother in a way that he would never understand or appreciate. I had chosen to carry the burden of this secret, to shield him from the humiliation of knowing his success was tied to mine. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I don't know what I'm going to do. But I know one thing. The war he wants, the one he thinks we've been fighting, it's been over for a long time. He just doesn't know he's on my team." And with that, I put the car in drive, the weight of the secret feeling just a little bit lighter now that Sarah knew. The next chapter of this story, our story, was about to begin, and for the first time, I wasn't sure who would be the hero and who would be the villain. The following morning, the silence was still a palpable presence in our home. Sarah went to work early, and I sat alone in my study, the faint scent of stale coffee lingering in the air. The Easter lunch felt like it had happened a lifetime ago, a distant memory of a battle fought and lost. Michael's words, a jagged stone thrown into a still pond, had sent out ripples that would not fade. He had called me a failure, but the truth was, his perception of my life had always been a distorted funhouse mirror. I couldn't help but be taken back to a time when our lives weren't so separate, a time when our destinies were still entwined, a time when the seeds of his resentment were first planted. Our rivalry didn't begin with corporate buyouts or newspaper headlines. It began in our suburban childhood home, a seemingly harmless competition that our parents, in their well-meaning ignorance, had fostered. It was the subtle, almost invisible ways they praised one of us over the other. I remember one specific afternoon, a crisp autumn day when the air smelled of damp leaves and wood smoke. I was 10, Michael was 7. We were in the backyard playing football with a few neighborhood kids. I was small for my age, but I was fast. I dodged a tackle and sprinted to the end zone, a thrilling, triumphant feeling washing over me. Later that night at dinner, my father, a man of few words, clapped me on the shoulder. "That was a good run, son, a real good run. You have a knack for finding the open space." Michael across the table picked at his food, his face clouded. My father had meant it as a compliment, a moment of pride, but to Michael, it was a subtle confirmation that I was the one who was seen, the one who was noticed. This pattern continued. I was a good student. I wasn't a genius, but I worked hard. When my report cards came in, my mother would pin them to the refrigerator door, a silent monument to my academic success. Michael was more interested in building things with his hands, taking apart old radios and putting them back together. One time he spent weeks building a small, functional trebuchet out of popsicle sticks. It was a masterpiece of engineering, a testament to his ingenuity. He showed it to our father, who gave it a quick glance. "That's neat, son. You should probably focus on your algebra, though. A B+ is not going to get you into a good college." Michael's face fell. He never showed anyone his creations again. His passion, his unique talent, had been dismissed in favor of my textbook achievements. My parents were not malicious. They were simply a product of their time, believing that a good education was the only path to a stable, secure life. They had no way of knowing they were teaching Michael that his talents were less valuable, his passions a waste of time. As we grew older, the rivalry deepened. In high school, I was the captain of the debate team and president of the student council. My college applications were stacked with extracurriculars and glowing letters of recommendation. Michael, on the other hand, was a solid B student. He was a gifted mechanic, and he spent every waking hour in the garage working on an old Mustang he bought with money he earned from a part-time job. I remember him coming home one night, covered in grease, his eyes alight with a specific kind of joy. He had just replaced the transmission. He was so proud. "I'm thinking of applying to trade school, Dad," he said at dinner one evening. "I could get certified and open my own shop one day, or maybe work on race cars." My father laughed, a short, dismissive sound. "A mechanic? Michael, you're too smart to be a mechanic. You're going to college like your brother." Michael's dreams, his passions, were not just dismissed, they were actively discouraged. He was told to be like me, to follow my path, to chase a future that was not his own. He was forced to apply to universities he had no interest in attending, and when he was rejected from a few of them, the disappointment on our parents' faces was a tangible thing. I got into the business school I wanted, and the contrast was stark. I remember my mother hugging me, tears in her eyes. "I'm so proud of you, David. You did it." She was happy for me, of course, but her happiness came at Michael's expense. He saw my success not as something I earned, but as a prize I had won by following the rules, by playing the part that our parents wanted me to play. He saw my college education as a symbol of their favoritism, and my eventual career as a fulfillment of a destiny he had been denied. He began to see me as the person who had stolen his narrative, who had taken his rightful place in the family's eyes. Over the years, the distance between us grew. After college, I moved to a different city for a job. I was working long hours, building my career from the ground up, and I didn't have the time or the energy to go home every weekend. Michael stayed closer to home, and our infrequent conversations were strained. He would call and ask about my work, but his tone was always laced with sarcasm. "Still climbing that ladder, are you? Hope the view is good from the top." He was a man drowning in his own bitterness, and he saw me as the cause of his suffering. He believed I had an easy ride, that I had been handed everything, that I was a fraud. He couldn't see the sacrifice, the lonely nights, the crushing pressure of building a company from the ground up. He couldn't see the person I was, only the success he thought I had stolen from him. And so, the Easter lunch wasn't an anomaly. It was the culmination of a lifetime of resentment, a lifetime of miscommunication. He didn't just call me a failure, he was trying to reclaim a narrative that had been stolen from him years ago. He was a man who had been told his dreams weren't good enough, and he saw my life as a living embodiment of that rejection. I sat in my study, the memory of our shared past a heavy weight on my chest. I had kept the secret of his employment from him, because I knew instinctively that it would destroy him. He was so convinced that he was a man who stood on his own 2 feet, a man who had done it all on his own, that the truth would have been a wound he could never recover from. He thought he was free of me, but in a cruel twist of fate he was more dependent on me than ever, and I was the only one who knew it. The phone rang, and I looked at the caller ID. It was Ken, Michael's manager. He was calling about a project. The real world, the world of business and spreadsheets and professional decorum, was intruding on the private, painful world of my family. I had to be David, the CEO, a man in control, a man with a plan. But for a few moments, I was just David, the older brother, sitting alone, haunted by the ghost of a sibling I had never really known. The fluorescent lights of the office felt sterile and unforgiving after the warm, chaotic glow of my mother's dining room. The air smelled of burnt coffee and ozone from the printers, a stark contrast to the scent of baked ham and family that still lingered in my mind. Monday morning was always a grind, but this one felt particularly heavy. I walked through the halls of my company, the Ascendant Group, and saw the faces of hundreds of people whose livelihoods were tied to the decisions I made. It was a weight I had carried for years, and today it felt heavier than usual. I had barely settled into my chair when my assistant, Maria, buzzed me on the intercom. "Ken is here for your 9 a.m. meeting, David." "Send him in," I replied, my voice calm and even. I ran a hand through my hair, checking my reflection in the polished surface of my desk. The CEO mask was firmly in place. Ken came in, a man in his late 50s with a neat grey beard and a no-nonsense demeanour. He was one of my most trusted senior managers, a veteran of the sales department, and the man who unknowingly was my brother's direct supervisor. "Good morning, Ken," I said, motioning for him to sit. "How was your Easter weekend?" "Good, good. Quiet. Just what I needed," he said, pulling out a tablet. "Look, I have a few things to go over, but the main thing is the new expansion project, the one in the Midwest. We need to start putting together the teams. My East Coast team has been the most effective, but there's a problem. My stomach tightened. What kind of problem? It's a personality issue mostly. It's not performance-related, so it's not really my place to interfere. But Michael's team lead, a guy named Rick, came to me and said there's some friction in the group. He said Michael has been difficult. Not with the clients, but with the team. He's always arguing against the new strategies, saying they're a waste of time. He claims he has a better way of doing things. I nodded slowly, a familiar feeling of dread creeping into my chest. This wasn't a professional issue. This was Michael. This was the same man who, in my mother's dining room, had accused me of being a failure. The same man who thought my company's strategies were a joke. He had brought his personal issues right into the workplace. "What's the performance review on Michael like?" I asked, trying to sound as neutral as possible. Ken squinted, thinking. "He's good. He hits his numbers. He's a smart guy, no doubt. But he's a maverick. He doesn't like following the rules. He thinks he knows better than everyone else. It's hard to tell him what to do." Ken chuckled, a small, tired sound. "He's a bit of a cowboy. You know the type." I knew the type. It was the same rebellious spirit that had made him tear apart his own trebuchet when our father had told him to focus on his algebra. It was the same stubborn pride that wouldn't let him accept help. It was who he was at his core, and it was the same thing that was now causing issues at my company. "How's his relationship with Rick?" I asked. "It's strained. Rick is a good guy, but he's by the book. Michael challenges him at every turn. It's not good for morale. I'm thinking about shuffling Michael to a different team, maybe giving him more autonomy on a smaller project." A familiar old-school sibling rivalry was playing out in my own company, and I was the puppet master pulling the strings, all without anyone knowing. It was a bizarre, surreal kind of power, and it was deeply unsettling. "Let's hold on that for a minute," I said. "The expansion project is a big one. I want to hear everyone's ideas. I'm going to call a meeting with all the team leads in the East Coast department. I want you to bring everyone, including Michael." Ken raised an eyebrow. "Everyone? That's about 40 people, David. And Michael isn't a team lead." "I want to hear from the people on the ground," I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. "I want to hear from the people who are actually making the sales. I want to know what the real issues are. It's a good way to test the water. And I think Michael might have some valuable insight. I've seen some of his numbers." I paused. "Let's just say he's a surprisingly good salesman." Ken nodded, looking a little confused but accepting my decision. He left and I was left alone with my thoughts. I was going to force a professional confrontation with my brother, and he wouldn't even know what was happening. I felt a mix of anxiety and a strange kind of vindication. He had called me a failure on my mother's turf. Now I was going to show him, on my own turf, what a failure looked like. The meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. In the hours leading up to it, I couldn't focus. I kept going over the old arguments in my head, the moments of bitterness, the years of neglect. My mind kept flashing to that moment at the table, his face twisted in rage, his voice a venomous whisper calling me a failure. He had no idea how much it hurt, even now after all these years. And he had no idea that I held his financial well-being in the palm of my hand. At 1:55 p.m., I walked into the large conference room. The air was buzzing with the low hum of conversation. I saw Michael immediately, huddled with a few other salesmen, a look of suspicion on his face. He saw me, and for a fleeting moment, a flash of surprise crossed his face before he schooled his features into his usual expression of barely concealed contempt. He wasn't a child anymore, but he still carried the same grudges, the same resentments. I took my seat at the head of the long table, and the room fell silent. "Good afternoon, everyone," I said, my voice projecting with the authority I had earned. "I'm David. I know many of you, but for those who don't know me, I'm the CEO. I've called this meeting today because I want to hear directly from you. The East Coast has been performing exceptionally well, and I want to know what's working and what's not before we start our new expansion." For the next hour, I listened as the team leads presented their strategies. They talked about new tech, new marketing tools, and new ways of reaching clients. Michael sat quietly, his arms crossed over his chest, a look of skepticism on his face. When it was his turn to speak, his team lead, Rick gestured to him. "Michael, you have a different perspective on this," Rick said, a hint of exasperation in his voice. Michael stood up, a reluctant and defiant look on his face. He cleared his throat. "With all due respect," he began, and I knew that phrase meant disrespect was about to follow. "I think we're wasting our time. All this data, all these new age strategies, it's all bull. People don't want to be a number on a spreadsheet. They want a relationship. They want a human connection. My numbers are good because I pick up the phone, I talk to people. I don't rely on some algorithm to tell me what to do. You can have all the technology in the world, but it's still about trust. And a lot of these newfangled strategies are built on a foundation of distrust." He looked around the room, a defiant glint in his eye. He was saying exactly what he thought. He wasn't playing the corporate game. He was being himself. He was being Michael. And in that moment, in a strange way, I was proud of him. He was a man of his convictions. The room was silent. Everyone was waiting for my reaction. I looked at Michael, and for the first time, I didn't see a rival. I saw my brother, a man who was stubborn and proud, a man who had been told his entire life that his way wasn't good enough. I leaned forward, placing my hands on the table. "Michael," I said, my voice low and calm. "That's a very interesting point. A very good point, in fact. Thank you for that." The room was shocked into silence. Michael looked at me, a mixture of surprise and suspicion in his eyes. He had expected me to dismiss him, to prove him wrong, to treat him like a failure. But I hadn't. "The truth is," I continued, looking around the room, "we have to do both. We have to use data and we have to use human connection. Michael is right. Without trust, without a personal touch, all the data in the world is meaningless, and I think we've been forgetting that." I saw a look of reluctant respect flash across Michael's face. He had expected to be shut down. He had expected a fight. Instead, I had validated him. He sat down, a look of deep confusion on his face. The meeting ended shortly after. As everyone filed out, Michael lingered behind. He didn't look at me, but I knew he was waiting. He was waiting for me to say something, to continue the fight he had started at Easter. I walked up to him. "You have a good point, Michael," I said quietly. "You've always been good at seeing the things other people miss." He didn't reply. He just stood there, his hands in his pockets, his shoulders slumped. He looked tired. The anger was gone, replaced by something more complicated, something I couldn't quite read. He had just been validated by the man he despised, the man he believed was his enemy. He had just been praised by his secret boss. The irony was so thick I could almost taste it. He finally looked at me, his eyes full of a strange mixture of confusion and defeat. He said nothing, just gave me a short, almost imperceptible nod, then walked out of the conference room and into the long, sterile hallway. I was left alone in the silent room, the ghosts of our past still whispering in the empty chairs. The professional battle was over, but the personal one had just begun. And I had a feeling this was only the first shot. The next few days at the office were a strange dance of unspoken tension. Michael's newfound, albeit reluctant, respect for me after the meeting was palpable, but it was also a source of obvious confusion for him. He avoided eye contact, and his usual passive-aggressive demeanor was replaced by a kind of quiet sullenness. He was grappling with a reality that didn't fit his long-held narrative, and the internal struggle was written all over his face. On Thursday afternoon, the uneasy truce was shattered. I was in my office reviewing Q3 projections when Maria buzzed me. Her voice was laced with a hint of panic. "David, you need to get to the main conference room. It's the Anderson account. They're on a video call and they're threatening to pull the contract." My blood ran cold. The Anderson account was massive, a cornerstone of our quarterly revenue and a deal I had personally negotiated years ago. I sprinted down the hall, my mind racing. I burst into the room to find Ken, Rick, and a handful of other senior managers staring at the large screen, their faces a mix of frustration and defeat. The Anderson client, a woman named Carol, was on the screen, her face flushed with anger. "I'm telling you, this is unacceptable, Ken," she was saying, her voice a sharp-edged knife. "We were promised a fully integrated system by the end of this month. It's been 3 weeks and we're still dealing with this glitch. It's costing us thousands a day. If you can't fix it, we're going with your competitor." Ken was stammering, trying to placate her. "Carol, we're working on it. Our tech team is on it 24/7. We're doing everything we can." "Everything you can is not enough, Ken. I need solutions, not excuses. I'm giving you until Friday at 5 p.m. to fix this. If it's not fixed, the contract is terminated." She ended the call abruptly, and the screen went black. The room was silent. I looked at Ken. "What's going on?" I demanded. "It's a glitch in the new automated client management system we rolled out 2 weeks ago," he explained, running a hand through his hair. "It's something in the back end, a small coding error, but it's causing a major lag in their data entry. The tech team has been trying to find it for days, but they're stumped. They can't pinpoint the source of the problem. It's a complete mess." My mind went into overdrive. This wasn't just a simple problem. A systemic error that a team of tech experts couldn't fix was a major red flag. I looked at the frustrated faces of my team. I knew I needed a fresh perspective, someone who thought differently. My eyes landed on Michael, who was standing quietly in the corner, his gaze fixed on the blank screen. I walked over to him, my voice low. "Michael, I need you in my office. Now." He followed me without a word. He looked nervous, his eyes darting around the room, but he didn't argue. Once the door to my office was closed, I turned to face him. "You've been with this company for 3 years, I began, my voice calm but urgent. "You know the system inside and out. You deal with the clients, you see the problems firsthand. What's going on with the Anderson account?" He shrugged, feigning ignorance. "It's a tech problem. That's what they told us. It's not in my department." "Don't give me that," I said, my voice rising slightly. "You're the one who said the new strategies were a waste of time. You're the one who said we were losing the human touch. Tell me what you really think." He hesitated for a moment, then sighed, defeat washing over his face. He sat down, leaning forward, his hands clasped between his knees. "They didn't just say the new system was a waste of time," he said, his voice low. "They said it was a mess. They said it was creating more problems than it was solving. They said it was too complicated, too convoluted. The old system, the one we had for 10 years, it was simple, it was straightforward, and it worked." "And what's your take on it?" I asked, leaning against my desk. "My take?" he scoffed, a flicker of the old anger returning. "My take is what I said in the meeting. You guys are so focused on the big picture, on the grand strategy, that you forget about the small stuff, the stuff that actually matters, the stuff that actually gets the job done." "But what is the problem, Michael?" I insisted. "What's the actual technical issue?" He looked at me, a strange mix of emotions in his eyes, frustration, reluctance, and a spark of reluctant pride. He had been so used to being dismissed, to being told he was wrong, that he had forgotten how it felt to be asked for his opinion. He hesitated, then pulled out his phone. He opened a notes app, scrolled through a long list, and then stopped. "I don't know about the technical issue," he said, his voice low. "But I know what a lot of the guys in my department are saying. They're saying that the new system is a patch-up job. They said it's a bunch of different codes from different projects, all glued together with a bunch of new stuff. They said it's a Frankenstein monster. And the truth is, a lot of them are trying to find workarounds. Because it's so damn complicated, they can't even use it. They have to go back and fix the data later. They're spending hours on it every day. It's not just Anderson. It's a lot of the newer accounts. And no one wants to talk about it because they don't want to get in trouble." He looked up at me, his eyes pleading as if he were trying to gauge my reaction. He had just admitted to a massive, company-wide problem, a problem that could cost us millions. He had risked his job, his reputation, his very livelihood. I felt a surge of respect for him. He wasn't a maverick. He was a ground-level employee who saw a problem that the C-suite and the tech team had completely missed. He had been brave enough to point it out, even when he knew he could get in trouble. "What's the solution?" I asked, my voice calm. "The solution," he said, a cynical laugh escaping his lips. "There is no solution. You guys messed it up. You have to scrap the whole system and start over. Or you find the source code and you build something to fix it. But good luck with that. You'd need a tech savant, and an old-school genius who knows how to fix Frankenstein's monster. And I don't think you have that. I stared at him, my mind racing. The pride he had in his knowledge, in his ground-level perspective, was undeniable. He was a man who worked with his hands, who had a pragmatic, no-nonsense approach to problems. It was the same quality that made him so good at fixing cars, and it was the same quality that made him a good salesman. He was a fixer. He saw problems where other people saw data, and he saw solutions where other people saw complications. "Michael," I said, my voice low and serious, "do you know where the original source code is for the old system? I want you to go get it. Now, you and I are going to go through it, and we're going to find the problem." He looked at me, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. He had expected me to dismiss him, to tell him he was out of his depth. He had expected me to treat him like a failure. But I wasn't. I was treating him like an equal. For the first time in our lives, our roles were reversed. He was the one with the knowledge, and I was the one who was asking for help. He stood up, a slow, hesitant nod on his face. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. He just walked out, a new kind of purpose in his step. The crisis was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. But for the first time in years, I had a feeling we were fighting on the same side. Michael returned with a USB drive, the worn plastic case, a small, insignificant object holding the entire infrastructure of our company's past. He didn't say anything as he handed it to me. He just stood there, his hands in his pockets, his face a neutral mask. I could see the conflict in his eyes, the same look of confusion and defeat I had seen at the Easter lunch, now tinged with a reluctant curiosity. "Let's go to my office," I said, my voice low. "We're going to need a bigger screen." The office was quiet, the only sounds the hum of the air conditioning and the distant ringing of a phone. I led Michael to my study, a large, well-lit room with a floor-to-ceiling window that overlooked the city. He looked around, his eyes scanning the sleek mahogany desk, the shelves lined with books on business and economics, the framed photos of my family. He didn't comment, but I knew he was cataloguing every detail, storing it away to be used as ammunition later. I plugged the USB into my laptop, and the old software with its clunky, outdated interface appeared on the large monitor. We sat down, shoulder to shoulder, two men who had spent a lifetime in conflict, now forced to work together. "What are we looking for?" he asked, his voice flat. "The original source code for the client management system," I said, pointing to a labyrinth of folders. "The one before we bought out that other company and integrated their software. We need to find the old code, and we need to compare it to the new one. The glitch is a compatibility issue, I can feel it. Something from the old system is clashing with the new." He leaned in, his eyes fixed on the screen. He was in his element now, not as an angry brother, but as a man with a problem to solve. "It's a Frankenstein monster," he repeated, a hint of a smile on his lips. "A whole bunch of code from different brains, all sewn together with new parts. The monster is just trying to put itself back together." I nodded, a sense of relief washing over me. He understood. He had the same intuitive, hands-on understanding of technology that he had as a child when he built his popsicle stick trebuchet. He was a builder, a fixer, a man who saw systems not as abstract concepts, but as tangible things with flaws and imperfections. For the next 5 hours, we worked in silence. Michael, surprisingly, was the one who took the lead. He navigated the old code with an expert's touch, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He would find a line of code, his brow furrowed in concentration, and he would mutter to himself, a low, frustrated sound. He would pull up the new code, his eyes darting between the two screens trying to find the point of the clash. At one point he let out a frustrated grunt. "This is ridiculous," he said, slamming his hand on the desk. "This is a whole mess. The code for the new system, it's not even in the same language as the old one. This is like trying to put an English engine in a German car. It's not going to work." "I know," I said, my voice calm. "That's what the tech team told me. They've been trying to force it to find a workaround. They're idiots," he said, shaking his head. "You don't force it, you adapt it, you change it, you make it work. You don't try to make it something it's not." He pulled up another window, a black screen with lines of code scrolling down. He was writing something, a small piece of code, a patch, a workaround. He wasn't a tech expert, not in the traditional sense, But he was a man who knew how to make things work. He was a practical genius, a fixer. "It's not going to be a permanent fix," he said without looking at me. "But it'll get the job done. It'll stop the lag, and it'll allow the system to work for the client. We'll just have to manually patch it every time we get an update." I stared at him, my mind reeling. He had just found a solution that an entire team of tech experts couldn't. He had seen the problem not as a matter of data, but as a matter of logic, a matter of practicality. He had been right all along. "Michael," I said, my voice low and full of a new kind of respect. That's brilliant." He shrugged, a small, embarrassed smile on his face. "It's not brilliant. It's just common sense." A lot of the guys in my department, they knew this, but they were scared to tell anyone. They didn't want to be the ones to say that the new system was a failure. The word hung in the air between us. Failure. He had used it to describe me, and now he was using it to describe a corporate project, a project he had just saved. "They were right," I said, my voice a quiet confession. "The system was a failure, but you fixed it." He looked at me, a flicker of something in his eyes. A shared moment of triumph, a fleeting sense of brotherhood. We had just worked together, not as rivals, but as a team. We had solved a problem that could have cost us millions, and we had done it together. The clock on the wall read 2 a.m. The city lights twinkled outside the window. We were two men, exhausted and wired on adrenaline and stale coffee, in a silent room, connected by a shared triumph and a lifetime of pain. "I'm going to send this to Ken," I said, typing a short email. "How you get to take the credit for this? You earned it." He shook his head, a fierce look of pride on his face. "No," he said, his voice firm. "You don't get to give me anything, David, not anymore. I'm a big boy. I don't need you to give me anything." I looked at him, and for the first time I saw the man he was, not the man I had always seen. He was not a failure. He was a fighter, a man of integrity, a man who had been defined by his pride, but who was now finding a new way to live. "Okay," I said, a small smile on my face. "Then we'll both take the credit. It's a team effort." He didn't reply. He just stood up, stretched, and walked out of the office, leaving me alone with the glowing screens and the ghosts of our past. I had a feeling the war was far from over, but for the first time in a long time I had a feeling we were fighting on the same side. I didn't hear from Michael on Friday. Ken called me, his voice a mix of awe and relief. The patch Michael had created worked perfectly. The Anderson account was secured, the crisis averted. The next day, in a company-wide email, I gave a glowing review of the team's quick thinking and problem-solving, with a specific mention of Michael's crucial contribution. I didn't single him out, but I praised his unique, hands-on approach, a phrase I knew only he and I would understand. It was a silent olive branch, a small moment of recognition for a man who had gone his entire life without it. That evening, the silence in my house felt different. It wasn't the oppressive silence of an unresolved conflict, but the quiet that follows a storm. Sarah and I sat on the porch swing watching the last of the sun sink below the horizon. The air was cool and smelled of rain, a welcome change after the hot, tense week. "He saved the company, didn't he?" Sarah said, her voice soft. I nodded, a small, tired smile on my face. "He did. He saw a problem that a team of tech experts couldn't. He didn't see the code as a language on a screen. He saw it as a thing he needed to fix. It was exactly the kind of practical genius our dad always dismissed." "Did you tell him that?" I shook my head. "No, I didn't have to. He knew. I could see it in his eyes. He finally had a moment of validation, a moment of triumph. But it was a small moment, and it was hard-won." I thought about all the years of resentment, all the little moments that had built up between us. I had always seen Michael as a man consumed by his bitterness, a man who blamed me for his failures. But for the first time, I was starting to see the man behind the anger. I was starting to see his side of the story. I went inside and called my sister, Karen. She lived a few states away, and we had always had a close relationship, a kind of silent pact to protect each other from our family's dysfunction. She answered on the second ring. "You okay?" she asked, her voice laced with a knowing concern. "I heard about the Easter lunch. Mom called me, practically in tears." "I'm fine," I said, my voice low. It was a mess. But something happened. Something at work. I had to ask Michael for help and we ended up working together. He's brilliant, Karen. He's really, really good at what he does. It's just his pride is so complicated. Karen was silent for a moment. His pride is all he has, David. It's all he's ever had. What do you mean? You know what happened, David. Dad always praised you. He always told you that you were going to be the one to make it, the one who was going to be a success. He told Michael that his passions were a waste of time, that he needed to be more like you. Michael took it to heart. He believed he wasn't good enough. I know that, I said, a familiar feeling of guilt washing over me. I always felt like I was the villain in his story. You weren't the villain, Karen corrected gently. You were the trophy, and Michael was the one who was told he wasn't good enough to win it. He spent his entire life trying to prove our parents wrong, and when he failed, when he was laid off from his last job, it was a confirmation of everything he had always been told. He had no choice, David. He was drowning. He had a family to feed, a house to pay for. He had nothing left but his pride. That's why he took the job at your company. He was desperate. He had nowhere else to go. My heart sank. I had known he was struggling, but I hadn't known how much. I had seen his acceptance of the job as a kind of reluctant surrender, but Karen's words painted a different picture. It wasn't a surrender. It was a last resort. He had no other choice. He had to swallow his pride and take a job that he didn't want, in a company he didn't respect, just to survive. Did he ever know I had anything to do with it? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Of course not, she said, a small, sad laugh escaping her lips. He would have quit on the spot. He would have rather starved than owe you anything. He would have seen it as charity, as a handout. He's too proud for that, David. I hung up the phone, a new kind of emptiness in my chest. I had seen Michael's life as a narrative of a man who had chosen to be angry, but Karen's words had shown me that it was a narrative of a man who had been told he was a failure and who had spent his entire life trying to prove the world wrong. I thought about his life, the long, hard road he had traveled. He had worked his way up from the bottom, a man who had been told he wasn't good enough, who had been forced to leave his dreams behind. He had found a way to survive, to provide for his family, to be a man of integrity, even when the world was telling him he couldn't. And in a cruel twist of fate, he had ended up working for the one person he couldn't bear to owe anything. I thought about the night we spent in my office, the way he had ached to prove me wrong, the way he had worked, not for the money, but for the validation. He wasn't just a maverick. He was a man who had been told his entire life that his way wasn't good enough, and he was still fighting to prove that it was. I had been right all along. The war wasn't just about who was the more successful brother. It was about pride. It was about a man who had been told his entire life that he was a failure, and a brother who had to carry the burden of his success. I had always seen him as my rival, but in that moment, in the quiet of my home, I saw him as a man in pain, a man who was trapped in a narrative he had no control over, a man who was trying to find his way, just like me. I went to bed that night, a new kind of emptiness in my chest. The war was far from over. In fact, it had just begun, but for the first time in a long time I knew who I was fighting for. The phone rang just as I was leaving for work. It was my mother. Her voice, usually so bright and full of a brittle cheer, was low and hesitant. "David, can you meet me for coffee? There's something I need to talk to you about." I knew what it was about. She couldn't stand the silence, the Cold War that had been simmering for years and had finally boiled over at Easter. We agreed to meet at a small cafe near her house, a place we hadn't been to in years. The cafe was warm and smelled of cinnamon and fresh coffee. My mother was already there, a small, fragile-looking woman in a pastel sweater, clutching a cup of tea. She looked tired, a network of fine lines around her eyes and mouth deepening with age and a lifetime of worry. She was a woman who had spent her entire life trying to keep the peace, and she was failing. I sat down across from her, and for a long moment, neither of us spoke. We just looked at each other, two people who had spent their entire lives trying to navigate a relationship that was built on a foundation of unspoken hurts and hidden resentments. "I'm sorry, David," she finally said, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm so sorry. I know what happened at Easter. I know what he said to you." I shook my head, a small, tired smile on my face. "It's okay, Mom. We've been through worse." "No, it's not okay," she insisted, her voice gaining a little bit of strength. "It's not okay. It's been like this for years, and I've just let it happen. I never should have." Tears welled in her eyes, and she reached out, placing a shaky hand on mine. "I'm so sorry, David. I'm sorry for everything. I'm sorry for what your father and I did to you and to Michael. We never meant to do it. We just wanted you to be successful. We just wanted you to have a better life than we did." I felt a pang of sadness. My parents had come from a generation that believed a good education and a stable career were the only paths to a happy life. They had seen my ambition as a sign of success, a fulfillment of their dreams. And they had seen Michael's pragmatic, hands-on approach to life as a threat, a rejection of their values. "I know, Mom," I said, my voice low. "I know you didn't mean to. We didn't know how to handle it," she continued, a low, tearful confession. "You were so good at everything. You were so easy to be proud of. And Michael, he was a challenge. He was so stubborn. He was so proud. He wouldn't let us help him. He wouldn't let us tell him what to do." I looked at her, and for the first time, I saw her not just as my mother, but as a woman who had been struggling her entire life. She was a woman who had been trying to do the right thing to protect her family, but who had made a series of small, well-meaning mistakes that had led to a lifetime of pain. "I know, Mom," I said, my voice full of a new kind of understanding. "I know he was a challenge. He still is. He sees everything you've accomplished, and he thinks you were just given it," she said, her voice a low, tearful whisper. "He doesn't see the work, the sacrifice. He just sees the success. And he resents it. He resents you for it. And I encouraged it. I told him he should be more like you. I told him he should get a good education. I didn't see that he already was a genius. He was a different kind of genius, and I didn't see it." I felt a lump in my throat. My mother, in her small, quiet way, had just admitted to a lifetime of regret. She had been carrying the weight of her mistakes for decades, and now, in this small cafe, she was finally letting them go. "He's not a failure, Mom," I said, a small, sad smile on my face. "He's not a failure at all. He's a fighter. He's a man of integrity. He's a man who has always stood on his own 2 feet. And that's a kind of success that no one can take away from him." She looked at me, her eyes wide with a new kind of understanding. She had always seen Michael as a problem to be solved, but in that moment, she was seeing him as a person. She was seeing him not as a son who had disappointed her, but as a man who had fought his entire life for a kind of independence and pride that she and my father had never understood. "I'm going to talk to him," she said, her voice firm. "I'm going to tell him that I'm sorry. I'm going to tell him that he's a good man. I'm going to tell him that I'm proud of him." I looked at her, and a small, quiet sense of hope bloomed in my chest. For the first time I saw a path forward, a way to heal the wounds that had been festering for decades. The war wasn't over, but we had found a new way to fight it. We were fighting for each other now, not against each other, and for the first time in a long time, I had a feeling we might actually win. The call came on a Tuesday. I had just finished a long meeting, and my mind was still racing with projections and deadlines. It was Michael. His voice was low and hesitant, a far cry from the defiant anger of Easter. "David," he said, and I could hear the hesitation in his voice. "We need to talk. Can you meet me? Tonight?" I agreed, my heart pounding in my chest. We settled on a quiet bar downtown, a neutral territory far from my office and my mother's house. I arrived first, sitting in a dark booth with a glass of scotch, the amber liquid swirling in the glass. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and stale beer, a stark contrast to the sterile, modern feel of my office. He arrived a few minutes later, looking smaller than I remembered. He wore a simple jacket and his shoulders were slumped. The anger was gone, replaced by a deep-seated exhaustion. He slid into the booth across from me, his eyes avoiding mine. "Thanks for coming," he said, his voice flat. Of course, I replied, my voice calm. What's on your mind, Michael? He was silent for a long moment, picking at a napkin on the table. Mom called me, he said, his voice low. She told me she was sorry for all of it, for telling me I should be more like you. I just nodded, letting him speak. This wasn't my moment to talk. This was his. She said she was proud of me, he continued, a short, bitter laugh escaping his lips. She said I was a good man, a fighter. She said I had a kind of genius she and Dad never understood. He looked at me now, his eyes full of a raw, painful vulnerability. I didn't know how to react. I hung up the phone. I didn't know what to say. What do you want to say, I asked, my voice as gentle as I could make it. He took a deep breath, his hands trembling slightly. I'm sorry, David, for what I said at Easter, for what I've said my entire life. I've spent my entire life resenting you. I've spent my entire life trying to prove that I was better than you, but the truth is, I'm not. I'm just a man who's been trying to prove that I'm good enough, and I'm not. My heart ached for him. Michael, you are good enough. You always have been. He shook his head, a single tear tracing a path down his cheek. No, he said, his voice a broken whisper. I'm not. I had a dream. I wanted to open my own garage. I wanted to work on cars. But Dad told me I should be more like you, so I tried. I went to college. I got a degree in something I didn't care about, and I failed. I lost my job, and I had nowhere to go. He looked at me, a flicker of the old anger returning. I had to take a job I didn't want, in a company I didn't respect. I had to swallow my pride and go to work for a monster. I felt a pang of guilt. A monster? You're not a monster, he said, a sad laugh escaping his lips. You're a good man. You're a better man than I am, and I'm a mess. I've been a mess my entire life. I've been so angry at you that I couldn't see anything else. I couldn't see the good man that you are. I've been so consumed by my own failures that I couldn't see your triumphs. He took another deep breath, his eyes fixed on mine. I know you had something to do with me getting the job. Mom told me everything. She said you vouched for me. She said you helped me. She said you did it to help me, not to hurt me, and I can't believe it. I can't believe that you would do that for me. My own eyes were welling up now. I had spent my entire life trying to be a good brother, and I had failed. But now, in this quiet bar, my brother was telling me that he saw me. He saw me for who I was, not who he had made me out to be. I didn't do it to hurt you, Michael, I said, my voice low and sincere. I did it because I saw you drowning. I did it because you were my brother, and I couldn't let you fail. He looked at me, a flicker of something in his eyes, a shared moment of pain, of understanding, of brotherhood. We were two men, two brothers, who had spent their entire lives fighting a war that was never ours to fight. And now, in this quiet moment, the war was over. I don't know what to say, he said, a small, sad smile on his face. I'm sorry, David, for all of it, for everything. I'm sorry too, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I'm sorry that I was the one who got everything. I'm sorry that I was the one who was easy to be proud of. I'm sorry that I was the one who got to follow my dreams. I'm sorry that I was a part of your pain. We sat in silence for a long time. The weight of a lifetime of unspoken words finally lifted. We were two men, two brothers, who had finally found a way to be honest with each other. We were a work in progress, but we had a foundation now, a foundation of mutual respect, of understanding, of love. We can start over, I said, my voice hopeful. We can be brothers again. He looked at me, a flicker of something in his eyes. He didn't say anything, but he reached out, and for the first time in years he took my hand. It was a small gesture, but it was enough. The war was over. The healing had begun. 6 months passed. The wounds didn't disappear, but they began to scab over, a fragile new skin forming over old scars. Michael and I didn't become best friends overnight. We didn't call each other every day or share secrets like teenagers. We were two grown men, with lives and families and a lifetime of baggage. But something had fundamentally changed. We spoke more often, a few times a week. The conversations were simple at first. How's work? How are the kids? But they were genuine. He was still working at my company, and a new kind of respect had settled between us, a quiet understanding of what we had both been through. He still had his pride, and I still had my success. But now those things were just parts of us, not the defining force of our relationship. The next family gathering was a Thanksgiving dinner at my mother's house. The air was crisp and cool, a beautiful late autumn day. The house smelled of roasted turkey and pumpkin pie, a scent that now brought with it a sense of hope, not dread. When we arrived, Michael was already there in the living room, talking to my father. My father's mind was still slipping, but his eyes were clear and he was smiling. He was pointing at a photograph on the wall, a picture of Michael and me as boys, fishing with my dad on a lake in the summer. I walked over and Michael looked up, a small, genuine smile on his face. "He was just talking about that fishing trip," he said, his voice easy. "He said he remembered you catching that massive bass." I smiled, a small sense of relief washing over me. We weren't talking about work. We weren't talking about success or failure. We were just two brothers talking about our father, talking about a shared memory. The dinner was quiet, not with a tense, suffocating quiet, but with a peaceful, easy silence. There were no insults, no bitter remarks, no thinly veiled contempt. When the conversation turned to work, Michael spoke with a new kind of confidence. He talked about a project he was leading, a new initiative that was his idea, and his alone. I listened, my heart swelling with a kind of quiet pride. He was finally getting the recognition he deserved. He was finally standing in his own spotlight. Later, after dinner, we were in the kitchen, helping my mother clean up. The conversation was light, but there was a weight to it that was beautiful and profound. My mother was laughing, her face bright, her eyes free of the worry that had plagued them for so long. She had been freed from her guilt, and now she was free to love us both equally, to be proud of both of her sons, to see their worth not in their careers, but in their hearts. I looked at Michael, and he looked at me. There was no need for words. We had said it all. We had said everything that needed to be said in that quiet bar, in the dead of night, with the ghosts of our past finally laid to rest. We were two brothers, two men who had spent a lifetime in conflict, now standing side by side, a new kind of understanding in their hearts. He was no longer a man defined by his resentment, and I was no longer a man defined by my success. We were just two brothers, two people who had found a way to be there for each other, to see each other for who they truly were. As the night drew to a close, Michael pulled me aside. He handed me a small, crumpled envelope. "This is for you," he said, his voice low. "It's a Christmas gift. Don't open it until you get home." I opened the envelope when I got home. Inside was a handwritten note. It was simple and to the point. "Thank you, David, for everything." And tucked behind it, a small, worn photograph. It was a picture of a little boy no older than 7, with a bright smile on his face. He was holding up a small, hand-built trebuchet, a masterpiece of wood and string, and beside him, his older brother, a small, proud smile on his face, his arm around his brother's shoulder. I looked at the picture, and a single tear traced a path down my cheek. I hadn't been a failure. I had never been a failure. I was just a brother, a man who had made a series of small, well-meaning mistakes, but who had found a way to be there for his family. And in that moment, I realized that true success wasn't measured in money, or in titles, or in fame. It was measured in a single handwritten note, a single shared moment, a single silent tear. It was a journey of a lifetime, and it had finally come to an end. We were no longer two rivals, but two brothers standing on the same side, a new kind of peace in our hearts.